Alright, we are going through the biology air practice test, and we're picking up here with number 33 on the test. So this is a cladogram. This cladogram is based on a chart listing some common features of different photosynthetic organisms, different things related to plants and other photosynthesizers. So we've got our list of organisms on top, and we've got derived characters. These are the characteristics that have been evolved over time, listed here, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your job in this problem is supposed to be to list the number of each characteristic and where it goes in order to show the proper evolution for each of these organisms and whether they should have this trait or not. So, what we're looking for is traits that when we pass through them, remember, anybody who passes through them during their evolutionary history should have that characteristic. Anybody who doesn't pass through them should not have it. So first, we're going to look for a trait where green algae is an outgroup. Green algae does not have it. Everybody else on this list should have that trait. So the only one up here that does that, every one of these guys has this trait except green algae. That trait is cuticle. Cuticle, it's like a waxy surface layer. Number 2 goes right there in that first box. So cuticle would go here. So now we know everybody else now has cuticle. From mosses on down has cuticle as a characteristic. And now we want to see beyond cuticle now, what are we going to find where mosses are the outgroup? So ferns, conifers, monocots, dicots, they all have it. And that would be this trait right here, vascular tissue, number 5. That's your next one. Now I'm looking for something where mosses are the outgroup, along with green algae, and ferns. All 3 of those are now going to be the outgroups here to find the next trait. So the next trait is only for conifers, monocots, dicots. Seeds would be that one. That's number 4. And then the last one, only what monocots and dicots have, and that would be right here. That would be flowers, number 3. So 2, 5, 4, 3 are the right numbers for that one. Alright, next up in this one, we're looking at a series of evolutionary events. So here's our individual species. They're lizards that live on an island. We have Staff Island where lizard V lives, and we have Bow Island where we have 2 species. We have T and U. So we have a series of statements that are supposed to be about the history of these lizards. Yeah, so our job is to basically sort these. So these can be like moved around and sorted in the proper order. And so our job is to sort them into a sequence that makes sense according to what this chart shows us. So we're going to put them 1 to 4 from top to bottom. So as you read through them, the one that has to start off at the beginning, or else it would make this a lot more confusing, is that this one has to be first. Biologists observe a population of lizards on Staff Island, but that no lizards are at Bow Island. In order for this sort of evolutionary history to happen, we can't have no lizards at this island at a later point. It seems like we would definitely have them moving in and then making 2 different species there. So no lizards goes first. The next most likely characteristic, or the next most likely step, I guess, along the way here, along the timeline, is, let's see. Here we go. Biologists observe a lizard breeding pair from Staff Island now, moving to Bow Island. So now we've got a breeding pair where we have migration of some individuals from Staff Island to Bow. So it was uninhabited, now it's inhabited. We had some lizards move over to that area. Now, the lizards on Bow Island experience different selection pressures and begin to occupy different niches. That would be our 2 differences here. Biologists determine that experimental matings of lizards from different island lizard populations are unable to produce offspring. So this, unable to produce offspring, what that means is that's speciation. So that means our 2 different islands have become 2 different species. So that's actually what this is right here. These 2 have become 2 different species. So notice this is lower on this chart that means it happened before this split. So that means this one actually has to go third, and this one goes fourth. So again, first there were no species on Bow Island, and then some lizards moved over to Bow Island, and eventually as they started to grow a new population, as they founded a new population, eventually scientists that took some of these lizards, the Bow Island ones and the Staff Island ones, they couldn't reproduce anymore. They tried to breed them and they couldn't. So that means we now had a speciation where they split apart. So now the Staff Island lizards are different from the Bow Island lizards. And then as time goes by, going up this ladder here means time goes by. Eventually our last step happens, where lizards on Bow Island start to become different enough eventually so that they speciate and become two different species. So that's our correct order there. Alright, another sequence one. This has to do with fertilizer runoff. When fertilizer runs off of areas like farmland or over-fertilized lawns and it runs into streams and rivers, lakes, ponds, it can cause algae to start producing like crazy because there's all kinds of nutrients available. That makes the algae want to reproduce and they grow like crazy. We call that an algal bloom. That is step one. An algal bloom happens first. So that's the first step. Second, and this is how we get to the point where oxygen goes away. This is what we're trying to lead up to here. So the second step in this process is that the algae that have bloomed are now going to consume the available nutrients and then they're going to start to die off. Now, with a pond or a stream or a lake full of dead algae, the next thing that happens is that decomposers are going to take over and they're going to start breaking down the algae. Now, decomposers, just like many other organisms, they use oxygen to survive. And because of that, because they're not photosynthesizers, they don't make oxygen, but they use it in order to survive. So decomposers increase their oxygen consumption, and that's the last step that leads to hypoxia, which means low oxygen levels. So algal bloom happens first, then the algae consume all the nutrients, and then they start to die back off again. Step 3, decomposers start to eat them, basically, and then decomposers, because there's so many of them now, they're going to use up more oxygen. So that's step 4. Alright, next up. This is a carrying capacity question. Population growth if there were no limitations, unlimited space, unlimited food supply, no sickness, no predators, nothing like that were going to happen. Populations could grow like this. They would grow, and the bigger they got, the faster they'd grow, and they would get steeper and steeper until populations were just booming. In reality, natural environments always have resource limitations. So the question says, which graph realistically predicts growth for a natural squirrel population with no predators? So we have 4 options here, 4 different types of graphs, and the question again says there's no predators, but it also says that it's a natural squirrel population. So even though it's kind of a trick question, even though there's no predators, there actually still is a limit to how big they can grow because there are other reasons. Remember, it's not just predators, there's also things like disease, there's food limitations, there's space limitations, there's water limitations. All these things get in the way. So there's still going to be a normal sort of carrying capacity that we hit. So here, letter B identifies that. What's going to happen is these guys are going to, they'll overshoot a bit, and then the population will die back off again. And so we get this this sort of normal carrying capacity limit. So that's answer B. These other ones, they don't really fit. This doesn't work because, again, they stop growing. This doesn't seem to fit. None of these actually are suited. Letter B is still correct here. Alright, next up, we're looking at an evolutionary history of some birds. Avians are birds. And our job is to sort out which bird species belongs on, no, these are just families, which family belongs on each line. And what they've done for us here is they've listed, sort of like the derived characteristics, they sort of listed the changes that happen for each split. So we have Ptiloris as sort of our outgroup. It's the one that split away early. It's listed right here. That's where its DNA is. And we're looking at DNA changes that have happened to other groups since then. So since Ptiloris split away, the first change was 26T. Letter 26 was a T. It became C. Every other species had that change, so that's what we see here. Or every other group had that change. So we see all the C's here for these other groups. Now, I'm going to go to the most specific one first here. Number 1 was a T and it became a C, so that's the second change that happened for some of these guys, for Vireo and then 2 other ones. So that's a change that this guy didn't get, but these guys did. So T becomes C. That happened for Diphyllides. It did not happen for Epidonax. It did happen for Manicodia and Vireo. So it looks already like this change did not happen for Empidonax. So that looks like this is probably the one that's going to be over here. 13C becomes A. Let's check that. Also Empidonax. So that actually sounds like this guy belongs right here. For our other ones, we've got 1T becomes C, and we also have 31C becomes T. 31 was a C, and it becomes a T. Diphyllides and Vireo. Vireo we see. That means the other one here must be Diphyllides, and our last one must be Manicodia. So there's our sequence there's our cladogram for these sequence changes. And this will be our last one for this video.